Hello! Welcome to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the horror movie podcast, where we talk about films off the Rotten Tomatoes 200 Best Horror Movies of All Time list. My name is Clay, and with me, as always, is Amanda. How are you doing, Amanda?
I'm good. I'm sitting on my couch. I've got at least 4 bottles of whiskey next to me, and I don't trust men who walk quietly.
Nor should you. Or men who... There's the opening scene of this movie when he's walking in there with the prostitute, and he's got the camera hidden under his jacket.
Yes.
I was like, how is that not supposed to be conspicuous? Like, is
right?
I was like, is that a Bowflex in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me? It's what is that loud mechanical whirring sound coming from your front pocket?
I guess if you're a 1950s/1960s sex worker in London, you've like seen it all, so you're just like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, good deal though from that lady.
I know.
Yeah. Anyway, what we're talking about today.
Wouldn't it be amazing if what we were talking about was just like we went to London and hung out once?
I think it would be interesting if we talked about this movie, but only the economics of the prostitute scene.
Yes.
In 1960s England.
Let's do it.
We are talking about Peeping Tom from 1960. This is number 32 on our list with a 95% Rotten Tomatoes score. You know, not to keep harping on this, but this is number 32.
Yes.
And I think I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that placement. Like I think this movie has a lot of importance baked into it. It's for a lot of reasons. Number 33 is 10 Cloverfield Lane.
What?
Yeah.
Which
it's good.
Fun movie, but I don't know if I would put it on this list at all.
Yeah, not that high anyway.
Yeah. 187 would be great.
Had you seen Peeping Tom before?
No, I knew nothing about this film.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, went in totally cold.
2 in a row. Well, actually, 2 in a row for me as well from the early days of Netflix Clay renting horror movies he's never seen before.
Stealing DVDs from Netflix.
No, I sent this one back.
Got it.
Not that I didn't send the other one back. It just got lost.
I see.
This was another one where I had come across some sort of list. I can't remember if it was online or if it was one of those scariest movie moment shows or whatever.
Oh, AMC telling you like you should watch this one.
Which are I really like those shows. There's actually there's a new one. They made one for Shudder.
Oh, fun.
That's I think like the 101 scariest movie moments. Which a couple weeks ago I found myself lying on the couch at 2 a.m. watching that, and I was like, I feel like I'm 12 again.
Yeah, but that's how that kind of stuff should be watched.
Right.
2 a.m. alone in the dark on the couch.
Yes, yeah. Taking notes. But yeah, this was one that was came very highly regarded. I had never heard of it before. And yeah, I saw it, and it was definitely much different than I was expecting.
Yeah.
But I liked it. And there is a lot to talk about, so we will play the trailer for you, and then we will get into it.
Look out! Look out! Look out! Take care. You are being watched. We repeat, take care, for you are now alone with a killer. We warn you, don't let him see the fear in your eyes. For this is what he seeks, and this is why he kills.
Where are you? Where are you?
Look out for Carl Boehm as the Peeping Tom. Fear him, but pity him also.
It's so good.
Watch out for Moira Shearer as the lovely stand-in who innocently dances into danger.
Imagine someone coming towards you who wants to kill you, regardless of consequences.
A madman?
Yes.
Wait!
Anna Massey is the girl who falls victim to the charms of the lonely stranger upstairs.
Switch it off, Mark. Mark, switch it off.
Maxine Audley, as the blind woman who senses the danger that threatens her and her daughter, but is helpless.
Don't be frightened.
Not frightened. Hot. So put that camera away!
There is no future for anyone who tries to befriend him. He invades the privacy of innocent people till the piercing eyes of his camera meet the terrified eyes of his victims. And with a compulsion akin to madness, he shoots the final, fearful scene.
Okay, Peeping Tom, directed by Michael Powell, written by Leo Marks, starring Carl Boehm, Anna Massey, Moira Shearer, Jack Watson, and Dance. I think it's at least a supporting role of the art of interpretive dance.
Absolutely.
Amanda, what happens in Peeping Tom?
Loner Mark Lewis works at a film studio during the day and, at night, takes racy photographs of women. Also, he's making a documentary on fear, which involves recording the reactions of victims as he murders them. He befriends Helen, the daughter of the family living in the apartment below his, and tells her vaguely about the movie he is making. She sneaks into Mark's apartment to watch it and is horrified by what she sees, especially when Mark catches her.
Happens to the best of us.
It's the whole movie.
Yeah, pretty much.
That summary was just the whole movie.
Well, good night.
Goodbye, folks. Anyway, Clay, some things you'll find in Peeping Tom include quote-unquote educational books.
Yeah, I had a lot of questions about that because the guy goes into this store.
Yes, and this is very early in the movie.
Yeah, this is like the second scene,
Yes.
second or third scene.
Yes, an older man comes into the newsagent's shop.
Yes.
Which is like a corner store.
And requests to see The Views.
Yes.
Which apparently seems to be a book full of pornography.
Yes, naked ladies.
And then he purchases the whole book, I think. He buys the whole book.
Well, first he peruses the whole book.
That's true, yes.
And reacts as though he's never seen a naked woman before in his life.
Well, you know, English are pretty uptight, especially in the 60s, coming out of the war.
Fair,
you know,
fair,
we were
yeah.
repressed, so you never know.
Yes, he buys the whole book of Views.
Yeah, and then they put it into this bag, this very discreet bag that says educational books on it.
Yes.
But everywhere else on the walls and on the doors in plain view in this newsstand are naked women.
This was one of my questions in my actual notes about like what is happening here.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm 100% sure there is some sort of contemporary thing we just don't understand.
I hope so, because otherwise, weird choice.
Unless the stuff he was buying was like hardcore stuff, maybe?
I don't think so. I think it's just the pictures that Mark takes.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Anyway.
You know what it reminded me of? I can't remember I think I showed you this part of it, but I have a video of you. No. I have a video
Jesus Christ.
I have a series of videos taken at the
Moment of Death?
Yes, at the video store that I used to go to when I was a kid.
You did show me those, yes.
And it's great. It's from like 1987. This is just like home camcorder footage from the people who own the store, filming the people who came in.
Suburban video rental store.
Yeah, it's very fun to peruse those views. But there's one guy in there who is just flipping through the porno book.
Oh, yes.
And it's really funny because he's just like casually doing it.
Yeah.
And I can't decide if it takes a huge amount of self-confidence or a negative amount of shame to go into a normal video store that is not a pornography store and just be like, could you just bring the pornos over and
in full view of everyone.
Right.
That's the thing. It's not like it's not like in Union Square at the old Midnight Convenience when there used to be the porn room in the back.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just like
ballsy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to assume it's not the first time he's gone in there to get porno, right?
I mean, if I'm recalling correctly what you had in your views, he looked pretty comfortable. Like he looked pretty like he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
This was not like a shifty affair.
And so like you have to think the people at the neighborhood video store know this guy as someone who comes in to rent porn.
Yep.
And he's apparently cool with it. And they're making money.
Just let him live, okay, Clint?
No, it's just it's a mindset that I can't. Good for him, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Anyway,
living his life.
Some other things you'll find in this movie include. Where is I going next?
If he had been like a jaunty, jolly English fellow, like in the movie.
Oh yes, sir. Of course, sir.
That would be great. It would be much better.
A blind mother who can still see the red flags.
Yeah. She. I'm not totally sure what she thinks he is.
I want to talk about that more.
Okay.
Like when we're in it.
Sure.
Because I do find it kind of like plot wise a little murky.
Sure.
Yeah. Where else am I? Really good coats.
Great coats in this movie.
Great coats. All sorts of collars and things going on.
Yeah, Mark has a really nice coat.
Yep.
There's the one, I think the dancing girl, the one Viv has a is it her who has the Bane jacket?
I'm pretty sure there's a couple kind of Bane style jackets.
Really
around
nice,
with
like
the
big
sheepskin collars, and they're
I want one of those
big
so
and cozy
bad.
looking.
I feel like I could pull off a Bane jacket.
I think you could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have not been able to find one like a real one.
Scare the crap out of people who don't know you.
Yeah.
Be great.
Yes.
Okay. Cop plot.
I would hope somebody would say to me that coat looks very comfy for you.
Please don't hurt me.
Nobody cared who I was till I put on the coat. Yes, cop plot.
Cop plot.
My favorite thing ever.
Calling it out just for you.
It's an English horror movie. It's gonna have a cop plot in it for some reason. Not too much cop stuff in this.
Yeah, it is.
It
is kind of the last like third of the movie, and it's pretty directly just like in parallel to what is actually happening.
Yeah, and
you know, like there's like we find a body on set, and then the cops are on set, and then they leave.
And
there's not a ton of like following the cops. Like there's a couple little scenes in there, but there's not the cops don't pull too much focus.
And they don't even ultimately do anything because like at the end he basically they don't stop him or anything, and like the only reason that they know he's there is because he basically gives himself away.
Yes.
So they're just there because they have to be, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
I would say Hall of Fame level questionable.
Yeah,
parenting.
top 3, I would say.
Yeah,
top 3.
I feel like at some point we have to go back through and like suss out like the most questionable parenting we've ever come across.
Yeah, that would be maybe for our 100th episode. I'll put together
something we have to do.
I'll put together a tournament bracket.
Oh.
And I will put it out there, and the patrons and anybody else can vote on the different rounds of the tournament bracket.
Nice.
Which sounds really fun, but like 3 people are probably going to do it. But anyway.
We will be 2 of them.
Yes.
Who's going to join us?
Anyway, Peeping Tom. So I think the thing that stands out to me the most about this movie is this came out in 1960. It came out like I think 3 weeks before Psycho.
Oh wow.
And Psycho generally gets the nod as being like the start of modern horror movies, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you know, the slasher movies, everybody goes back to Psycho. A lot of the stuff that from the 70s and the 80s, a lot of people go back to Psycho.
Yeah.
I think this movie is equally as important to that evolution.
Yeah.
If not arguably more. Maybe more is debatable, but
more is a tough one because I think since Psycho is so ubiquitous and so widely known that there's like everybody kind of trying to reference it and trying to do homages and stuff, whereas I think this one is a deeper cut.
It is, but the thing that's so fascinating about it is it has so many more of the what would become like slasher movie hallmarks than Psycho does.
Interesting.
Where, you know, this is where you get the first-person killer shot for the more probably around the first time. They don't really do that in Psycho, I don't think. Do they?
I feel like there's a couple moments. I don't know if it's technically because the shower scene.
Is that first person? I will get there eventually.
It's sort of. I don't know.
Well, this has it on the scale of like Halloween. So
yes.
like Halloween's
where you
opening
are
scene
explicitly put in the position of the killer.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, the thing I find interesting about this movie is it is very reminiscent of Italian giallo movies, but it is 4 years before those even started. So like this feels very much like it could have been a Mario Bava movie, but it predates those. And so I have to imagine they were pulling from this as much as they were pulling from anything else. Although maybe not, because one of the bits of trivia about this movie, it was in the theater for 5 days until it was forcibly removed because there was such an uproar and a response about the content that they forced it to be removed from theaters and effectively ruined the career of the director.
Holy shit. So was it just seen as sort of pornographic in and of itself?
Yeah.
Or just like morally abhorrent kind of
basically.
deal? Like
yeah.
It's so horrible?
It was basically like the sex, the violence, and the combination of sex and violence was at a level that was indecent at the time.
Yeah.
And so it was taken out. And this was made by Michael Powell, I guess, was a director who had a pretty good career and was known for making like well-regarded higher class movies, I think. And then he comes out with this thing and nobody gave it a chance and just looked at it at face value and was like, this is trash, and essentially ruined his career.
Jeez, that's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting though, because I feel like it's always deceptive when we talk about dates, and we all kind of, I think, instinctually or like subconsciously, we think about things in terms of decades.
Yep.
So when you hear this comes out in 1960, you're like, oh, but it was a movie in the 60s. It's like, well, no, it came out in 1960, which is essentially still the 50s.
Yeah.
Like, so it's, I think even while we were watching it, I didn't even really process this the way I am now as we're starting to talk about it, where it's like, yeah, this was early.
Yeah.
This was really early.
Yeah.
Like even a movie that came out in 62 or 63 is like more firmly into a new quote unquote more modern era. This is coming out in a society that's still very much like post-war.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, that's
and
interesting.
I do think that this movie is where I would say ultimately the content of Norman Bates' character is probably more and like what he does is probably more disturbing.
Yeah.
I think this movie actually is more disturbing than Psycho is. Because I think this is a real mental mindfuck kind of movie for the people watching it for a bunch of different reasons, but also just the stuff that they're willing to show in this. Well, it's not like there's not blood spurting everywhere and stuff, but there's some kind of fucked up kills in this movie.
Oh yeah.
You know, not just the main thing that the guy's doing, which is filming these women with a mirror on the front of his camera,
his weaponized camera.
Yeah, and his one of the legs of his tripod is actually a giant like stiletto knife.
Yep.
And he very slowly kills them with it, and then films themselves watching themselves die.
Yeah.
So you got that. You get a lot more insight into what was done to this guy by his father.
Yes.
Whereas I'm not trying to drag Psycho because Psycho's fine. But like
I love Psycho.
Yeah, it's fine. It's good. I
love it. So.
I'll be interested to talk about it because I go back and forth on Psycho a lot. But Psycho, you don't really get much into Norman Bates, his psychology, whereas this one, it's like normally I would say you get too much and like, why is this stuff on tape and why does he have this? But that's the whole point of the whole thing.
Right. It's like the fact that this has happened and that he still has these tapes is why he is the person he is today.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like you're getting a much more frank kind of look at something while on its face is essentially like Batman villain level.
Yeah.
Is actually a really uncomfortable kind of look at psychology and the psychology of voyeurism and how that plays into people watching movies.
Yeah.
And I think I hadn't watched this in 15 years.
Wow.
Is that true? Yeah, at least. And I was really struck this time by how ahead of its time it was for the stuff it was talking about.
Yep.
We talked about how it's almost feels like it's commenting on a genre that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
Because it does kind of, if you made this movie in 1985, people would go, oh, it's a comment on the slasher movies.
Yes.
If
yeah.
you didn't change a frame.
This is a metafiction, metatext kind of thing where it's talking about like how you as the viewer are complicit in the violence because you're watching it and you're all of that kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, that didn't really, there was nothing to comment on yet.
Well, that's the thing, though, because I think if it had been made in the 80s, there would be a more specific thing to comment on.
Yeah.
But being made when it was, it's a much larger commentary on just the movie watching experience in and of itself.
Right.
Which is even, I feel like it's almost even more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it's not just being like, oh, these movies are blank. It's like, no. You,
yes,
the viewer,
if you watch anything, you are like this in some way. Yeah, which I think is really interesting because at the time, I mean, I'm not super up on all my historical facts around this, but this was around the era where people were starting to have televisions in their homes.
Yes, this was
pretty early.
I believe I was reading this was before most people had TVs.
Yeah, but it wasn't unheard of.
No,
they existed. And people went to the movies.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a common activity for lots of folks. So it's becoming part of daily life in a big way, sort of for the first time for the average person.
Yeah.
So I think that does make it really interesting to then have this movie that's all about somebody who's obsessed with watching and looking through the camera and looking through, photographs and on screen rather than directly interacting with people when they do stuff.
Yeah. Well, I blabbed on for long enough. What did you think of this movie?
I really liked it.
Yeah.
I was ready based on the premise for it to be a lot more. I keep kind of waffling on what word to use because exploitative sounds really strong, and I didn't even think it was gonna be an exploitation film, but I guess I was ready for it to be a little more lurid.
Sure, yeah.
Just in terms of kind of doing the the girls deserved it kind of vibe. Well, what did they expect sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this doesn't really go in that direction.
No,
no. We were kind of joking at the top about the sex worker at the very beginning. And it's actually kind of nice because she's well dressed and well put together and she's pretty. She's not if this were made in the 80s, she'd be run down and addicted to drugs and all of that.
Yeah.
And she goes back, she takes him back to a nice looking apartment. It's okay, yeah, she is a prostitute, but she's not a stereotype of she's look at her, she's filthy and a mess and she's horrible, so she kind of deserves to die.
Right.
And the girls that he photographs, one of whom he photographs for the views.
Yes. For not the TV show The View.
Right.
Although who knows?
Maybe.
Yeah.
She's sort of sassy and talks about oh, I was out with my boyfriend and I was nervous because my fiance might have seen us.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. But even so, she's not really looked down on by the film. She's just doing a job.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And even then Helen, the girl he kind of falls in love with at the house, he has a recording of her in one of the other boarders, a man's room.
Right.
At the end, and it's her saying well, I'm too nervous, and he's no one's gonna come in here, it's fine, and she's oh, well, I don't know, and it's clear that it's oh, well, she was sleeping with him,
right,
and we're not then encouraged to be oh, well, now Mark should kill her.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess this is a very long way of saying I was very surprised at how borderline progressive this movie was.
Yes.
Where it's
it definitely puts all the blame on Mark. It does
but
not.
Even then, I actually argue it puts all the blame on his dad.
That's true. Good point. Yeah.
So it's sort of this weird, it's finding empathy for Mark throughout the movie as well. It's a very nuanced, shockingly nuanced for a movie that came out in 1960, where it's usually you would expect a movie from that time period, the bad guy is just going to be the bad guy.
Sure.
And I think in this, there's much more room for debate over like how responsible is Mark for his own behavior?
Mm-hmm.
What should ultimately happen to him? Like, is it good that he kills himself? Is that justice, or would it have been better if he did get help?
Right.
Like, I don't know. I really liked this movie. I think
Yeah.
it's like a very rich text.
Yeah, I also really like it. I think there's so much that you can dig into. Like you were talking about the opening scene with the prostitute, and how she's not run down. She's very nice looking.
Yeah.
And as you're talking about it, I was thinking, it's like, well, I mean, the point of this. Well, one of the things that he's talking about with this movie is this idea of watching people, watching movies, and I was thinking, she doesn't look like a quote-unquote prostitute. She looks like an actress. She looks like a movie star.
Yeah.
And so the first thing that you have in this movie is through the first-person point of view, which essentially means the audience point of view, is the murder of a sex worker who looks like a glamorous actress. And
Who's
it's
being played by an actress.
Right. And so it's like, man,
Yeah.
that kind of, there's so much of that stuff runs through this movie.
Yeah.
Like one of the bits that I really liked was the movie. So Mark works as a focus puller for this actual movie.
Yeah.
And so, there's some. I will give this movie more credit than I was expecting for how tongue-in-cheek, darkly funny a lot of it is, especially everything involving the shooting of the movie, like the actual movie.
Yes.
Was really funny.
Yeah.
In like a really dark kind of way. But there's they have this big set of like a department store. And they also have like a mock-up of the department store that's for like reference. It's like made out of cardboard or whatever.
Yeah. And
there's a certain point where I'm pretty sure they shoot the actual set from the same angle they shot the prop. And it makes the set look like the fake prop.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that's just like it. They don't draw any attention to it. They just do like a little quick shot to match the other thing. And it's so much of that considered imagery in this movie that really pushes this into a like, it doesn't surprise me that at the time the only thing that got pulled out of it for people watching it was how violent and lurid it was.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, like again, if this was made 10 years later, this would be like a Grindhouse movie. Yeah. You know? Like if this was made in America in 1978, this would be Driller Killer or something, you know?
Yeah.
Well, that being said, Driller Killer is in the Criterion Collection, so maybe not the right one to use, but you know what I mean.
Right. And it's funny because I think when I first like kind of read the summary, the synopsis, like overview of this movie before we watched it, I was sort of expecting something more like that.
Yeah.
And was really surprised at what I got instead, which is very much like, amongst many other things, a commentary on the making and consumption of movies. Yeah. And like the idea of artifice in general, like you're saying with like the actual set and then the prop set, and then like even Viv, the extra or the stand-in who he kills on set. She has her whole dance number to like music she brought in herself on her little tape player.
Her very portable, very convenient portable music player.
Yes.
It's basically the iPod of its day.
I was going to call it a Walkman, but
yes,
you know.
which was about 1 foot by a foot and a half.
Yep.
Probably weighed
14 pounds.
Yeah. It plays one song.
Yes. But even that was really interesting, having her do a whole dance number before she gets killed. It sort of felt like almost a little silly and a little jarring in the moment to watch it. And then as I thought about it, I was kind of like, you know, but like part of the thing is this is commenting on not only the consumption of films, but the desire to be on film.
Absolutely.
Like what kind of person wants to be in front of the camera and what kind of person wants to be behind it.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's I feel like you can do a lot thematically with this movie. This would be great to write like a very long paper on.
Yes.
Because I'm a giant nerd.
And, you know, there's a great scene towards the end where the girl whose name I can't remember.
Which girl?
The nice one who lives in the house.
Helen.
Where Helen,
daughter of Mrs. Stevens, Daredevil
Helen
mom.
Stevens. Where Helen stumbles upon one of Mark's films.
Uh-huh.
And basically can't take her eyes off of it.
Yep.
So she has this moment where she sees it and is horrified by it. And then he shuts it off, but then all she does in the rest of the scene is ask him what happens next.
Yes.
And it is kind of interesting where it's like she's just viewed this horrible thing. She knows what it is, but she's like, I need to know what happens.
Yeah, you have to tell me. She keeps saying things like, because he's like, please don't be frightened. I don't know if I can control myself if you're frightened. And she says, you have to tell me what you did to these girls or I'll be frightened for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Like, she keeps emphasizing that, like, the only way for you to let me out of this is to tell me exactly, explicitly what you did.
Right.
And it's like, wow, okay. Maybe you guys are a good couple after all.
You know, that is one thing where I think the way that they play this out is ultimately fine. Maybe you'll disagree, which is hopefully, maybe, which is great if you do. But like I was getting. Why is it always like the love of a nice woman that takes these psychopaths and makes them like okay? You know what I mean? Like it's like that's what they do in these movies where it's like, so like we were talking as we were watching this, we were talking. It reminded me a lot of Manhunter or Red Dragon.
Yes.
And for multiple reasons, like
yes.
there's
for
I would
many
be
reasons.
I would be shocked if
Thomas Harris hadn't just been like
and
and taking copious notes.
Although I don't know though, because one of the other things was this movie was not is he American? Thomas Harris?
I believe so.
Okay, this movie was not released in theaters in America until 1999. So
wow.
I don't know who in America saw it. Apparently Martin Scorsese did because he was basically this movie's only champion for a long time.
Huh. Wow.
But a couple of the things that reminded me of Red Dragon is this idea of the outcast character, the quiet outcast, who has a fetish for filming people that he's killing.
Yes.
Who is then sort of
who works at a photo developing place.
Yep. Who is sort of diffused a bit by an actual woman.
Yes.
Not entirely dissimilar to Martin, actually.
Martin is something I definitely want to talk about in comparison to this movie.
Sure.
Yeah.
But like that one, this one, and Red Dragon kind of are all doing the same thing where it's like you've got this. I don't want to say he's misunderstood because he's a psychopath, but you've got this person who clearly is very insular, does not have any experience with other people or anything close to resembling real love.
Yeah.
And he gets a taste of that, and it kind of diffuses him.
Yes.
But ultimately, it ends up going horribly wrong.
Right.
How do you feel about that as a trope? Because like I thought in this one it actually worked pretty well because I didn't think it let him off the hook for anything. Mm-hmm. And I mean, all of those examples, that never really lets them off the hook for anything. But anyway.
Well, here's the problem with this trope, in my opinion, is that like it's so much more widespread than the three movies we just mentioned.
Yeah,
it's
those three are pretty good examples of like well done versions
exactly,
of it. Yeah.
And that's what I was gonna say. Like sometimes things become a trope or a cliche because they work.
Right. Yeah.
And this is one that I think when it works, it makes a ton of sense. We just so happen to live in a society that
the Joker over here.
I know, right? That typically, men are seen as the aggressors or violent, and so you're going to get these stories where it's more often than not a male figure who is the one perpetrating violence, and then it's this love that they never got from a woman, kind of maybe almost settling them out, getting them out of that cycle of violence. The reason why it's frustrating is because it's done so much. It's all over the place. Yeah. And when it's not done well, it turns the girl into just a prop.
Right.
Where it's like all of our focus and our emotion is supposed to be on the man, whether or not he's a good guy or a bad guy. Mm-hmm. And then it's just like, because it turns it into a woman's fault then if you can't diffuse him.
Sure, yeah.
which is like a thing that happens in real life around like serial killers a lot,
Or-
where they talk about like, well, his mother fucked him up, so it's his mother's fault. Or
if
this woman was engaged to him and she broke it off, and then he raped and killed 30 people, and it's her fault.
I would say it's less that it's her fault and more that it actually acts to humanize the killer by
Yeah.
giving him that scene where he's like, it's too late for me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Which I think still turns the woman into a prop, because
Yeah.
now she's just like a what's the word I'm looking for? A device.
Exactly.
She's only there ultimately to give him a little bit of sympathy before he
Yep.
ultimately gets killed.
Yep.
Which is why I find it so fascinating in horror movies,
Mm-hmm.
how this trend morphs into, it's not the woman who's giving the monster a little bit of humanity. It's the woman who's cutting his fucking head off.
Right.
Like all of that is gone. And instead of
Yes.
having,
It turns it from like a relationship where she's kind of a device to get him to this revelation, and it flips that into an adversarial relationship instead.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's never, is there a Friday the 13th where the girl tries to like,
In 2,
she kind of psychoanalyzes him.
yeah, but she
separate
sort of
from him.
Yeah,
But
but she sort of does the like, I'm your mother, you must listen to me.
That's true.
thing, which
Yeah.
is a little bit of the. It's not quite the same. I'm
Yeah.
not trying to say it's the same, but yeah, it's really fascinating, and I'm not. It's funny because I don't love that trope, but I actually didn't hate it in this movie. Like, I feel like the two characters kind of. I mean, honestly, I think the actors were really good.
They were, yeah.
So I think they just had like good chemistry and sort of a believable rapport, and like the idea that like she's this younger woman who lives in this boarding house with her blind mother who's pretty dependent on her, and that the young handsome man who lives in the attic, who's always kind of like quiet and mysterious, appeals to her. And then she turns out she's a writer and he's a filmmaker, so they're both artists in their own ways. And so I sort of bought it that she'd find him like mysterious and romantic
yeah.
rather than just like flat out creepy. Which was part of my problem, I think, with Martin and his second cousin or whatever who he lives with. Like,
Yeah.
where it's like, A, you're cousins, and also B, he comes in and is just like creepy.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the time creepy. And there's not a lot that's like charming or redeeming about Martin.
Well, the woman he ends up sleeping with in Martin is so like, it doesn't even matter. Like
Right.
she's so far gone at that point.
Exactly, which
Yeah.
is why I'm talking instead about
Oh, I'm sorry.
the
sure.
woman he lives in the house
Yes,
with,
his,
like his
Tatakuta's daughter.
yes,
Yeah.
or
granddaughter or
niece or
something.
whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, so like I wouldn't even in Martin focus on the woman he does end up having an affair with, because she I don't think is playing that role at all of the like, I'm going to like humanize you, I'm going to bring you back into civilization.
Right.
I actually think it's a kind of, thinking more about it now, a great subversion of that,
Yeah.
where she's using him as an escape, and then he doesn't work for her as an
Right.
escape, so she kills herself.
Right. Right.
But yeah, it's interesting, like the way it works in this movie, because I think it actually succeeds in building a little sympathy for Mark.
Yeah. I mean,
You know, seeing him genuinely struggle with himself and his own urges
Yeah.
to not hurt Helen is like, oh, okay, there's some part of him that means it with her.
right.
You
yeah.
know?
He's more like he's a very modern monster, but he has a lot of classic monster built into him. Like
Yeah.
he feels almost like Quasimodo-ish,
Yeah.
where he's like, I don't actually know if I've ever seen that movie, but like he's the old style of monster who is a little bit misunderstood,
Yeah.
but he is still doing bad stuff.
Right. It kind of gave me Frankenstein's monster
Sure,
vibes,
yeah.
where it was like you were created by a cruel scientist and then unleashed on the world.
Right,
And
right.
you know, you keep going after things you find beautiful and compelling and destroying them.
Yeah.
Kind of whether or not that's the actual intent.
Yep.
Like the thing with Mark that I think for him it's the fear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like he wants to watch the fear happen, and to do that he has to it's like an addiction and like a drug. He has to keep escalating how intense the fear is.
Yeah.
And so kind of that's why he kills them, is because that's the ultimate fear, is knowing you're about to die and knowing you're dying. I think it's less about the like, I love seeing dead women. I think it's more about I need to see themselves right in the instant before they die.
Yeah, there's so much interesting stuff you can read into his MO.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, I am very curious as to how many people he has actually killed.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, I don't think that you get to the point that he's at without trial and error, because it's not just that he films the women as he's killing them.
Yeah.
That's not getting the reaction that he wants.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes a step further, and instead of just having a camera on them as they're dying, he has this mirror that allows them to see their own face as they are being killed, which creates the scariest version of this, which, I mean, I can't disagree with that. But like, how do you get to that point? How many people has he killed? Because obviously when they talk about serial killers and stuff, it's like, oh, well, they escalate, right?
Yeah.
So he's probably done this the other way as well.
Yeah. Which is another kind of parallel with Martin, where it's like he's refined a system and he's figured out what works. But Mark has the added challenge, if you want to put it that way, of he's trying to also get good footage.
Right.
Like, he clearly has some sort of artistic standard for himself, because there's that amazing scene that I loved. It was probably my favorite part of the movie, where Mrs. Stevens, Daredevil mom herself, gets herself up into his apartment and into his dark room and waits for him to come home.
Right.
And then they have this sort of confrontation where they're kind of talking in riddles to each other, like around the real issues. And while she's in the apartment, he puts on his most recent snuff movie, and he gets really upset because the light fails at the last minute, and he doesn't get the picture he needs.
Also feels kind of like Red Dragon a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
With the blind woman.
Absolutely, it does. But so, you know, then you add into this idea of like trial and error and him figuring out the quote unquote right way that he wants to kill people. And then you probably add in like how many incidents like this has he had, where like the equipment fails, or the light's not right, or there's too much noise in the background. Like, how many times has he's killed someone but gotten bad footage out of it and goes, oh, I have to do another one. Yeah.
And I mean, it if you start extrapolating out the sort of allegory or metaphor that they're playing with in the movie, it's like they are distilling movie making down to basically getting everything you can out of the person on screen to the point that they die for the amusement of the person who's watching it. Yeah. Because that's the other thing is, you know, where he is not, like, he's killing the women for the footage. He's not killing the women because he likes to kill the women. Right. However, and so there is a sort of academic element to it. Yeah. Where he's exploring this fear aspect.
Yeah, because I think it's teaching him, in his mind, something about himself.
But also, they don't make this super explicit, but I still think he's getting like a sexual thing out of this.
Oh, probably.
Because the first time they show him watching the footage, they do this like weird cut around where at the moment that she dies, he kind of like leaps up out of his chair in a very suggestive way. And it's like a very quick cut. And I was like, I think I understand what's going on here.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a very complex thing that he's got going on that it's difficult to distill down to one motivation.
Yeah, and I think his sexual satisfaction comes from watching the footage.
Yes.
Exactly. I think it's not again, I'm going to use Martin because we just did it as and it's just like similar-ish as a convenient foil. You know, Martin is actively raping these women, right? Either right before he kills them or right after, when he's knocked them out, and then he exsanguinates them and rapes them, or switch those two.
Sure.
I think Mark is not raping them.
Right.
Or even really...
Well, I mean, metaphorically he is, but...
Right, but I mean literally.
Yes, yeah.
Like, literally, he is not raping them.
Right.
Or really even molesting them. It's very much just about getting this footage so that then he can run home and have his fun by himself.
Right.
With no one watching him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is also pointed.
Yeah. What do you think, I said earlier, what do you think the mother thinks he is? Because they have that scene where they kind of talk around stuff, and clearly she knows there's something wrong with him.
Yes.
To that she doesn't want him hanging around her daughter. But like, what could you glean from that she is afraid of with him?
So it's really interesting because initially I thought she had an idea that he was dangerous, like physically violent.
Mm-hmm.
And then she went up there and confronted him and sort of gave him a hard time about his films. And I was like, okay, so then do you just think he's like a weirdo? Is that what it is? But then she very quickly realizes she's in danger with him, that it's not safe. Like she's very much frightened, and she says she is. And then it kind of diffuses because he doesn't want to hurt Helen. Like he would hurt Helen if he hurt Helen's mother. And instead he kind of gives up on it, and she says to him, "You can't control yourself, can you?" Or something like that.
Yeah.
You're not able to control yourself. And then he kind of reassures her, like, I would never photograph Helen. And he, like, walks her downstairs. And she's the one who tells him, get help and quickly. Or you'll never see my daughter again. We'll move.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me because I can't really figure out, like, is she cognizant of the fact that he is a violent person?
Right.
Or does she just think that he's a creep or like a sex maniac? Do you know what I mean? Like, is she more afraid that he's going to force himself on her daughter? Or maybe that was where her fear was coming from. Like, is he going to force himself on me? Like, I am a helpless blind woman.
Well, what's interesting about that is that if there's anybody who's safe in that movie, it's her. Yeah. Because she wouldn't be able to see the thing. She wouldn't be able to emote the thing that he wants.
Right. If he tried to show her own face right before she died, it wouldn't work.
Yeah. Unless he had somebody there who was like explaining to her what was happening.
But yeah, it's an interesting question because, I love that sequence and I love that character. And I think the actress who plays her is amazing. And she's just such a fun character to kind of have in the movie. Like, she's a little snarky and a little like of a different tone than the rest of the people in the movie. But yeah, I can't quite figure out either. Like, what I think she knows enough to know that he's not a safe person for Helen to be around.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's
what form of danger that takes, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Why do you think Mark ultimately gives himself up the way he does by murdering the woman in the... So, a couple things.
Yeah.
The first scene that we see with him up in this boudoir, if you will. Yes. There are two women there, one of whom is not necessarily dressed that much different than the sex worker he actually does kill. That who's taking pictures of, and then there's another woman there.
Yes.
Who has a big... is it supposed to be like a hair lip?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wasn't totally sure what the read on that was, because it was really interesting. Yeah. When she turns, she's this gorgeous woman, but she turns around and she's got this...
We see her in profile for most of the scene until at the very end she turns to face camera.
Right.
Yeah.
And I couldn't read what his response was, if he was repulsed by it or if he was drawn in by it. I don't know if there's supposed to be some sort of overlap with the audience and him being like, "Oh, you're not expecting this, disfigurement."
Yeah,
I don't know. It was really interesting.
So I definitely think that Mark, the character, is very compelled by it because she turns and because when they're doing the photography session, the blonde woman, Millie, I think her name was, is saying to Mark, "Oh, you can fix my bruises, right? Like when you do the pictures, you can cover these up, you can make them look right." And he's like, "Yes, sure." And then the other woman, when she turns to face him, kind of says, like, "They told me you could fix me too," like in the photos. And he says something like, "I don't want to."
Yeah.
You know, and then he like very much like wants to zoom in on her face. And it's really interesting. I've been thinking about that too. I don't fully get what I don't really know exactly what all of that was about. I was kind of thinking like, is part of it, again, our own sort of voyeuristic impulses when we watch stuff?
Yeah.
Of being fascinated by things we find unusual or disturbing or even grotesque.
Right.
You know, like not being able to tear your eyes away from something you know you really shouldn't be looking at, or, you know, it's this is a really reductive example. But you know, like on TikTok and stuff, people for some weird reason love like pimple popping videos.
Ugh, yes.
I hate them. I
Ugh.
think they're gross.
Blech.
But do you know what I mean? There's that part of the human brain that is fascinated by things that would otherwise maybe cause you to recoil or be disgusted.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if it's kind of trying to comment on that, like being entertained or intrigued or drawn in by something like a disfigurement or something violent or something like that.
You didn't watch X yet, did you?
Not yet.
It would be interesting. It's interesting to think about that movie in relationship to this movie, because X is sort of,
isn't it also kind of about making a movie?
Yeah, it's kind of playing. It's playing a lot with the idea of how kind of similar horror movies and porno can kind of be, and how they are. A lot of people view them as sort of interchangeable.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of messing with certain preconceptions about what is beautiful and what is disgusting and stuff. And because I remember there's a scene in X where I don't know if this is I don't think this is going to ruin the movie for you, but there's a scene in X there's a very old woman who and her husband who own this farmhouse that these people are shooting their porno at. And there's a scene later in the movie where we're talking like decrepitly old.
Okay.
Where these two have sex.
Okay.
And it's
my first instinct is good for them.
Well, that's the thing, right? So it comes at a point in the movie where stuff has started going haywire. And so then there's this really sort of like aggressively, if you want to call it, passionate sex scene. And as I was watching in the theater, my first instinct was, oh, because they're like they're made up to be like very like, quote unquote disgustingly old, if you want to put it that way. But then like as it was going on, I was like, wait a minute, that's not fair of me.
Right. Well, I was gonna say it's that kind of thing where like you recoil, but then when you stop and think to yourself, you're like, well, I mean, I hope when I'm decrepitly old, I'm still having sex.
Yeah,
you know
and you know, like so much of that movie is about, you know, the what is beauty and the loss of beauty and what does that mean and all that kind of shit. And so when you have this sequence, that is it really works on both angles where it's like it's kind of gross to watch, but at the same time, I kind of feel like the movie is saying like, you know,
you think about why.
Right. Why are you reacting the way you're reacting to this scene?
Yes.
And I kind of feel like that a little bit in this part of the movie.
Yeah, I think this movie does that a lot, where it's kind of like saying to you like, you have to think like it's trying to get the audience to think about why it's okay for us to do it, but it's not okay for Mark to do it.
Right.
Or however you want to structure that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, why do you think he kills that woman to give himself up at the end? I was kind of having trouble tracking because he has like a moment where he's like, okay, I know what I have to do.
Yeah.
And that is he kills that woman, the blonde woman who he had been taking boudoir photos of
Yes.
earlier in the movie, and that leads the cops to him at his place.
Yeah.
But I couldn't quite square why he decided to do that.
My instinct is that it's probably kind of twofold.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first thing is that he's been kind of gradually circling closer and closer to home as
Sure.
he kills people.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's been less discreet like throughout the movie.
Yeah.
He starts with a nameless sex worker who he has no connection to in some neighborhood in London.
Right.
That's it. And then he kills Viv, who works with him.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty close to home at that point. Like that's putting yourself in real danger of being caught.
Can I just say, sorry to jump in the middle, I thought one of the funniest things in the movie, and probably the most scathing indictment of making movies,
Yeah.
was after they find Viv's dead body,
Uh-huh.
they go back to work on the same set.
Yes. Yeah, like very quickly.
And,
like the
the
next day.
And the director is like pissed off that the
Yes!
woman in the scene
Yes, he's
can't
mad at
handle
his
it.
actress.
Yeah, that was very funny. Anyway,
I also
sorry.
love when Mark's talking to one of the other guys who works on set, and he says he's been filming the whole discovery of the body, and the guy's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, I'm making a movie." And the other guy's like, "Are you crazy?" And Mark just goes, "Yes."
Yeah.
But that kind of does get back into I think Mark wants to be caught.
Sure.
I think on a lot of levels he wants to be caught. I think his ultimate goal is that he becomes sort of the finale in his own film.
Right. Well, he has been planning for this.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
He says in the sort of climax of the movie, when the cops are at the door and Helen has seen his horrible snuff films and he's preparing to kill himself, he kind of sets everything up and then goes back and he says to Helen something like, "Watch them say goodbye one by one. I've timed it so many times."
Right.
So this was always the plan, is like, I know I'm going to get caught one day, and when they come for me, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a bunch of cameras go off and take my picture. I'm going to kill myself the way I kill my victims.
Yeah.
I think what sets him off to decide that, like, now's the time is that he's in love with Helen.
Mm-hmm.
And Helen's mom has given him an ultimatum,
Yeah.
which is find help and fix your shit, or you'll never see my daughter ever again.
Maybe her stories were just that bad.
Um,
Oh no, there's a cop plot in this one. I can't go on.
Well, what I was going to say is the cops bring a psychiatrist to set,
Right.
who he then asks on set, what is it called? What makes a person a peeping Tom? And they have this whole conversation. He goes,
Psychiatrist who knew his dad.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And he says to the psychiatrist, well, can it be treated? Can it be cured? And the psychiatrist is like, oh, of course, yes. Can you do it quickly? Oh, very quickly. A couple years
Yes. Yeah.
of analysis 3 times a week for 1 hour each time, and then it should be better. And I think he realized that, like, oh, okay, if I had gone and they had been like, here's a pill, you're going to be fine, or like, here's a quick fix, you can go on with your life, I think then he would have done that and given it all up and gone off with Helen.
Yeah.
But I think that is a moment where he realizes that, like, there is no easy fix for what he is and what he's done. And if he wants to protect Helen from himself, he's got to just end his movie.
Yeah. You know, I will say, I thought that ending sequence was really cool. I thought the idea was really cool. I don't know if this was a conscious choice, but I think they could have shot that thing better, because it feels a little theatrical when he kills himself.
You don't say.
However, the thing that really stood out to me was I was really surprised that we didn't get to see it through the lens of the camera.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know how deeply, analytically nerdy I'm getting here, but like, is that on purpose? Because that would then give him what he wanted. I don't know. Like, I feel like a movie that seems to be as considered as this has to be making a choice not to show you his death through the lens of the camera.
That's a really interesting point. I hadn't like fully thought about it. I noticed watching it that it felt a little hokey. the ending. Not that I think the actual ending in terms of like if you put it down plot wise is hokey, but like the way it is acted and the way it is shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like, I agree with you that given how the rest of the movie is structured so carefully and everything seems so intentional, it would be weird if this was just like an oversight or like, oh, well, we want to see his face undistorted, so we're going to not do it through the camera. Like that.
Yeah.
That feels like not in keeping with the rest of the movie. So I don't know. Maybe it was a specific choice to sort of say, we're going to, rather than give the audience one more level of removal from Mark as he dies, we're going to make you just look at Mark as he dies.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Another interesting level of analysis. In the footage that he has that his father shot.
Oh, yeah.
His father is played by the director of the movie. And young Mark is played by the director's son.
Oh, shit.
And Mark's dead mother is played by the director's wife.
Oh, wow.
So he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's definitely aware of what he's saying with the movie.
Yeah, that's intense. That's great.
Yeah.
I didn't know that at all.
Did you feel like this had some David Lynch in it? Like that
Or
whole...
do you mean, does David Lynch have some this in him?
Yes, yeah. Like that whole dance sequence...
Yes.
Felt very David Lynchy to me.
I've been finally listening to watching that 4.5 hour YouTube explainer of all of Twin Peaks. And I was listening to a little bit of that earlier this week, and then we watched Peeping Tom, and I was like, huh.
Yeah. Some similar themes going on.
I definitely think there's a through line. I think part of it is anyone who sort of deals in fear and violence versus love and compassion in themes in their work, and then also is a filmmaker who's thinking about what it means to make films.
Yeah, like I feel like both of them have a really good grasp on artifice.
Yes.
And like
ways to use it.
Yeah, a well considered view on that, and not just the usual like, wait a minute, this sky is a painting. You know, it's like it's a more considered, more abstract idea of artifice and what it means in the context of movies and stuff.
No, I totally agree. I definitely see a connection there. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought this movie it looked fantastic. So Criterion put it out on DVD, but it's been out of print since about 2010.
Bummer.
And I don't think it has ever, at least in America, been released on Blu-ray.
Wow.
Which is a bummer because I would really like to watch a nice crisp print of this movie.
Kind of shocked why it's still so hard to find. It's not actually it's violent. It's definitely a violent movie. A bunch of people die in it, but it's not gory. There's very, very little blood. There's some pictures of boobs.
This is apparently
it's not even a lot of actual boobs.
It's apparently known as I believe it is known as the first English movie to have nudity in it. And there's about maybe 5 seconds of actual nudity in it.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I keep kind of I guess maybe I'm partially skewed because we just watched Martin and there's just naked ladies all over that movie. But yeah, it feels from a modern perspective, it feels strangely chaste for the subject matter. Pornography and prostitutes and women getting murdered, and it feels strangely clean for all of that. Yeah,
I'm kind of surprised no one's ever tried to remake it, frankly, because it has the kind of it's about the kind of thing that I feel like at least someone who is not as good a filmmaker as this guy was probably like, yeah, man, fucking A. But what about that? But now, you know?
Yes. And what if we showed their boobs every time they're gonna die?
It's what I didn't like about the original was that it was so clean. And like that first woman he kills, she's a prostitute, but she looks like a movie star. She should look like a prostitute. It's my man, I think you're missing the point here.
Exactly. This definitely seems like the kind of thing that's
give it
ripe
to Rob
for that.
Zombie.
Oh, That's actually who I thought of when you first brought this up. I was like, what, like a shitty Rob Zombie remake?
Speaking of...
Which is not that all of his movies are shitty.
No. No.
A different style.
Yeah. Speaking of, I did last night watch about 20 minutes of his new Monsters movie.
Oh, really? Aww.
Not great.
Oh, that's sad.
I mean...
I was always more of an Addams Family person myself.
Yeah.
But that's still a bummer.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe if it's got a certain thing that you might enjoy, if that's what you're looking for, but it just, there was... It felt like a... It felt like a straight to DVD movie from like 2002.
Oh no!
Yeah, it was not great.
Yikes!
It's really anyway. I don't want to. I haven't watched the whole thing, so I'm no authority on.
This
watching
is what our post podcast recording beer is for.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, I think this movie is beautifully shot. Like again, the it's in Technica. It's also interesting comparing this to Psycho. Psycho, obviously in black and white.
Yep.
This one is in like gorgeous Technicolor.
Yep.
Which I think is saying as much as anything else is about movies and stuff. And it does have a lot of lighting in it that reminds me of Italian movies, like the ones that come after it. Like I don't think it's on our list. Let me do a real quick check here. No, it's not. I think one of the next movies I might pick for a wild card is Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace.
Ooh.
Which is one of the earlier Giallo movies that's in just like big, bold colors. Like everything that Dario Argento was doing in Suspiria basically comes from this movie.
Oh, interesting.
Or the other color movies that Bava was doing.
Yeah.
And it's about a murderer who's killing models at like a high society fashion house.
Oh.
And so it's got these big colors, beautiful women, fashion stuff.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be gorgeous.
You know, the music is big and brassy and stuff.
Perfect.
Yeah. And it's like, I feel like that style of movie comes from this.
Yeah.
Because there is so much in this that feels like it's creating a genre that doesn't exist yet, but will exist very quickly. And it's that much more interesting to me that this was so short-lived.
Yeah, it's so... Every time you mention that, it's so strange to me, because I just can't imagine... I can imagine the reaction in the time, like at the time, being like, this is garbage, get it away from everyone. But I'm just so shocked this hasn't had more of a revival.
Yeah, like, me too.
At some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to watch this in a theater.
Yeah.
You know?
That would be great.
That'd be great.
That would be awesome. Yeah, because there are scenes where, like, in addition to, like, the color you were talking about, there are lots of scenes that are very dark and very shadowed. And I think seeing those on the big screen would be really great. And, like, I love, there's, again, in the scene where Mrs. Stevens is upstairs with him in the dark room, and he watches that footage of Viv, who he's killed, and he's kind of approaching the screen, and the projector's behind him, and it's projecting like her face is kind of on his back. Yeah,
that was really cool.
And it looks like that painting the screen.
It does, yeah.
But it's so, like, it makes her look like a ghoul. And it really heightens the idea that she's making this face of, like, abject terror. And yeah, I just thought that was, like, such a well done moment.
Yeah. How do you feel about the placement on this? This is very high on our list. This is, what did I say? It's 32? 32. Too high, too low? Would you remove it?
I mean, you know, I'm surprised because when we first said we were going to do this movie and I saw that it was really high on the list, I was kind of like,
there's no way this is one place better than 10 Cloverfield Lane. Yeah. This is your first thought.
I mean, obviously. Yeah. But also, I was kind of like, I've never even heard of this one, and it's in the top, like, 35. Like, right. I'm kind of shocked. Is it really going to be that good? And I'll give it to it. Yeah. You know, I'd keep it around where it's at. Yeah, I would too. I think also because... not that anybody gives a shit about this list, but I feel like... putting a movie like this that high makes I would like to think makes
them react the way that you did and the way that I did when I first found out about it, which was, I've never heard of this before. Why is this so highly rated?
Yep.
I should watch this movie.
Yes. Yeah. That's 100% kind of how I feel about it.
Same way I felt about 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Yep.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to cover before we wrap it up?
No.
No?
I think that's it.
Cool. And I thought the music was really good in this, too.
Yeah. The music's really fun.
Yeah.
In a weird way. Like, that sounds, like, incongruous to say about a movie where a guy kills a bunch of women. But,
well, we'll wait till we watch Blood and Black Lace. It's very... I tend... Whether or not I do it on purpose, I have a tendency toward... I wouldn't call it contrarianism, but I like to find the pieces, the missing links, if you will, sometimes where I can be like, well, you got to consider, like, you haven't thought about this, you've never seen this, actually check this out. Which is why I go to bat so hard for Black Christmas.
Yep.
And which is also why I go to bat so hard for this now.
Yeah.
I feel like those are in the same pocket where it's like, sure, Halloween, yeah, okay, fine. But Black Christmas...
Are you calling me a basic bitch in terms of horror movies?
Yeah. No, but I mean, there's obviously nothing wrong with that. But
No, I know.
It's I just see movies, when I come across movies like this that are, in both cases, way ahead of their time.
Yeah.
Like Black Christmas is turning the genre on its head that it is actually creating.
Yeah.
You know? I get a little bit bullish about them just because it's like, I don't want them to fall through the cracks.
Right, and there's that kind of question of, like, if these other movies that are so similar got so much attention and are still, like, like Psycho and Halloween are just seen as, like, permanent horror movie classics, and there's so much that you could parallel in these other movies, like Peeping Tom or Black Christmas, it kind of makes you think, like, if everybody loved this and sees this one as a classic, why don't they see this kind of, like, flip side of the coin or like tangent, like this I don't want to call them equivalent,
right?
But they're definitely kind of like dealing with some of the same issues and grappling with some similar stuff.
Yeah.
And there's some similar stylistic things going on, and maybe they're trying to take it in a little different direction. But yeah, it can be really frustrating if you think that they're of equal quality at least, if not that the lesser known one is better. It's kind of like, all right, then why isn't anyone paying attention?
Right.
Yeah.
All that being said, I don't understand why Black Christmas isn't more well known. I think it's more well known now, but still it's not that well known.
Yeah.
Because Black Christmas, I think, is equally as entertaining as any of the other movies that are slotted higher.
I mean, I will say, like, off the top of my head, I might rethink this later and change my mind. But of the
you
movies,
can't. Once it's on record,
it's permanent.
It's
It's
on
forever.
tape.
It's forever.
Yep. Until I sit on it by accident and erase it.
Of the movies I have watched for the first time doing this podcast with you, I think Black Christmas is my favorite new discovery. So I get it. I totally understand what you're saying.
But the flip side, I kind of understand why this didn't get as much play, because this, like, Psycho is just a masterpiece of movie going experience. Like, it's a crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
Like, it's well structured.
Well, wasn't the marketing didn't like The Exorcist take its cues from how Psycho was marketed, where they had, like, ambulances waiting outside for people to faint and things like that. So part of it's also that.
Sure. I mean, Psycho is very much it's more of a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
This is not.
No, you know right away who the killer is.
Well, it's not even that. It's like, you don't walk out of Peeping Tom and go like, man, maybe I do, but you don't walk out of Peeping Tom and go, man, that was fucking awesome. You guys want to go back and, like, watch that again? That was crazy. You want to go watch? You walk out of Peeping Tom and you just kind of, like, sit quietly for a bit.
Yeah, you think a lot about yourself,
right?
And, like, the moral choices of the entertainment that you consume.
If you go on a date to see Peeping Tom, it's probably the end of that date and probably the end of any further dates.
I was going to say, if you go on a date to see Peeping Tom, I hope you're two lesbians. Because if there were any men involved in this, they're going to be like, you're a murderer and I'm out of here.
If you go on a date to see Peeping Tom and either of you notices that the other one is, like, a little too into the movie.
He jumps up at the right moment.
Yeah. Maybe that's a bit of a different experience.
Be
than
like
if,
Mrs. Stevens and see those red flags.
Right. Yes. So I understand. I think this was obviously given a bad rap. I think it was not.
Sure.
I think like they say in Back to the Future. I guess you guys.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Well, that too. But I guess you guys aren't ready for this. But your kids are gonna love it.
Ah.
But I understand why it's not like a perennial classic that every Halloween we go to my friend's house and watch Peeping Tom.
Watch Peeping Tom. Yeah, that's. I think you're right. I think that's
maybe at Martin Scorsese's house. I don't know. But
probably. Oh God, could you imagine what it's like a Halloween film festival at his house?
That'd be That would either be really fun. No, he likes the schlocky shit, I think. I was going to say that would either be really fun or it would
Just
be
a
like,
downer.
Here's a French movie that's not really a horror movie, but I really loved it when I was 15 in New York. But I think he likes the down and dirty stuff as much as anybody else does.
There you go. Call us, Martin.
Yeah. We'll have him on the show. I mean, he should come on. Maybe Peeping Tom is so underappreciated that if I put it out into the universe that we want to have Martin Scorsese come talk about Peeping Tom, he would be like, absolutely, let's do it.
Wow.
Okay, I'm putting it out there.
Manifesting.
Yeah. Anyway, that's going to do it for Peeping Tom. I have hit the randomizer button. Beep, boop, boop, beep, boop, boop, beep, boop. And interestingly enough, given how much I talked about how this is a bit of a forerunner to the Italian Giallo.
Oh.
We will be watching next time Dario Argento's first movie, number 88, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
Ooh.
Which I have actually never seen.
Yeah, this is a new one for me too.
I've been wanting to watch it. Now I finally have a reason to.
Let's do it.
So I'm excited about that. But thank you guys for listening. If you want to help out the show, head over to the patreon.com/thepenskyfile. Join our Patreon where you can hear Amanda and I cover the second string of Stephen King films, which is the Stephen King movies that are not on our list but are still fun to watch. October is going to be Pet Sematary.
Yes.
We just did what the hell did we just do? It didn't have a car in it, so I can't remember what it is. Firestarter. We just did Firestarter, and sometimes they come back, and Christine and the other one with a car in it. I can't remember which one it is.
Maximum Overdrive. How could you forget?
Well, with many cars.
Yes.
And so that means November is going to be Children of the Corn.
Nice.
And then we are going to be rounding out the year.
Seasonally appropriate.
Yes. We'll be rounding out the year with the 1990 television adaptation of Stephen King's It.
I'm pumped for that.
Which I'm very excited about. So thank you guys. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Clay.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.